The rain had just begun to fall, soft and steady, tapping against the glass windows of Rosie's Diner, a little roadside café tucked away on the edge of a quiet Midwestern town. Inside, the clatter of silverware and murmured conversation created a cozy sort of background hum. Emily Harper moved briskly between tables, refilling coffee cups with her usual quiet efficiency, her worn sneakers squeaking faintly on the checkered tile floor. She had worked here since high school, saving every tip for nursing school, and though the hours were long and the pay modest, she never let her smile slip. At the far end of the diner, huddled in a corner booth, sat an older man she hadn't seen before. He wore a threadbare army green jacket, a black cap with faded yellow stitching that read Vietnam Veteran, and heavy boots streaked with mud. His hands trembled slightly as he wrapped them around an empty mug. For nearly an hour, he'd been sitting there, staring out the window or glancing down at the worn leather wallet he kept flipping open and shut, as if hoping its contents might change. Emily noticed he hadn't ordered anything. Most servers would have ignored him by now, assumed he was just killing time or escaping the weather. But something in his eyes, quiet, weathered, and far away, made her pause. She approached slowly, a pot of coffee in hand. "Afternoon, sir. Can I get you something warm?" she asked, her tone gentle. The man looked up, startled by the kindness in her voice. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I came in to get out of the cold. I wasn't planning to eat. I don't have enough today." Emily hesitated, glancing back toward the kitchen. Her manager, Rick, stood behind the counter, wiping down glasses and scowling at the drizzle outside. He ran the place like a ship captain, tight-fisted and with little tolerance for anything that didn't pad the bottom line. She knew what he'd say. But she also knew what her heart told her. "You like tomato soup?" she asked the man. He blinked. "Ma'am." "And grilled cheese," she added, pretending not to notice the way his throat bobbed when he swallowed. "I haven't had that in years," he whispered, almost as if he didn't believe the question was real. Emily gave him a little smile. "Give me 5 minutes." She hurried into the kitchen, rang in the order under her own name, and paid for it with the crumpled bills she had stashed in her apron pocket. The same ones she had set aside for groceries. When she brought the plate to his table, the old man looked up at her as if she had handed him a feast. His hands shook as he picked up the sandwich, and he whispered a hoarse, "Thank you," without meeting her eyes. She stood quietly for a moment, watching him take his first bite, before returning to her other tables. There was a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't about charity. It was about dignity. About reminding someone they hadn't been forgotten. But the feeling didn't last. 10 minutes later, Rick cornered her by the coffee machine. His lips were pressed into a hard line. "You gave that man food," he snapped, voice low but laced with fury. "I paid for it," she said calmly, wiping her hands on a towel. "That's not the point," he hissed. "You can't just feed every stray that walks in here. This isn't a soup kitchen." Emily froze, then looked past Rick to the corner booth. The man was sitting up straighter now, sipping his soup slowly, carefully, like he was trying to stretch the moment. Something in her broke. "It was one sandwich," she said. "One. And that's one too many," Rick shot back. "You're done. Grab your stuff." Emily sat on the edge of her twin bed, her apron still bunched in her lap, smelling faintly of coffee and grease. The rain had followed her home, drumming softly on the windows of the tiny apartment she shared with her younger sister. She hadn't told anyone yet, not about what Rick said, not about the look on the veteran's face when he saw her being pulled away from the floor, not about how her legs trembled as she handed over her name tag and walked out into the cold with tears stinging her eyes. She stared at her phone, the screen dark. There were no new messages, no missed calls. Just silence. She could still hear Rick's voice echoing in her head, "You're done. Grab your stuff." She hadn't argued. There was no point. Feeding a man who couldn't pay was all the justification he needed. Down the hall, her sister Lily was making microwave mac and cheese and humming along with a playlist. Emily wanted to protect her from everything, from rent notices to overdue textbooks to the painful parts of the world that made people choose profit over people. She hadn't told her about getting fired. Not yet. Maybe tomorrow. Her phone buzzed once, then again in quick succession. She looked down, expecting a spam notification, but paused. It was a text from Carly, one of the other waitresses at Rosie's. Carly. Girl. Did you see what I posted? It's blowing up. Like, seriously. Check Facebook. Emily's brows furrowed as she unlocked her phone and opened the app. Her heart skipped. There it was, a photo of the receipt with her name printed at the bottom and the words, "Paid by Emily," circled in red. Carly had captioned it. She got fired for feeding a hungry veteran. This is the world we live in. It had over 700 shares. 1,000 comments. Thousands of likes and growing by the minute. Emily's stomach turned. She hadn't asked for this. She didn't want attention. She didn't want to become a story or a symbol. She'd just done what she thought was right. She scrolled through the comments, her thumb trembling. Some were supportive. This girl has more honor than her boss ever will. I don't know her, but she's a hero. Where's this diner? Let's make sure no one ever eats there again. Others were cruel. Typical virtue signaling. You don't give away what's not yours. She broke the rules. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Emily closed her eyes. Each word landed like a jab. Praise felt as unsettling as the criticism. The story wasn't even fully hers anymore, it had become a headline, something for people to argue about while sipping their morning coffee. Lily poked her head in, holding a bowl and spoon. You okay? Emily looked up, startled, then nodded slowly. Yeah. Just tired. But her phone kept buzzing. A reporter had left a voicemail. Someone else had messaged her about starting a GoFundMe. Strangers were tagging her name, calling for boycotts of Rosie's diner. And somewhere in the swirl of digital noise, someone had tracked down the old man, the veteran she'd served. A photo of him, sitting at the corner booth, was now circulating with the caption. The man she fed. The man they turned away. She felt exposed, like she was standing in the center of a crowd with everyone shouting at once. 2 days after the photo went viral, Rosie's diner buzzed with nervous energy. The air was thick with tension, even as the comforting scent of bacon and pancakes drifted from the kitchen. The regulars, truckers, retirees, and tired office workers, whispered behind menus, casting sidelong glances at the counter where Rick, the manager, stood stiffly pouring coffee into a chipped mug. Business hadn't been the same since the post. People still came in, but they didn't smile. They didn't linger. Some asked about Emily. Some just left without ordering. And Rick, red-faced and short-tempered, pretended nothing had changed. Then the bell over the door rang. It wasn't just the sound, it was the way it rang. Sharp. Decisive. The kind of entrance that made heads turn. 4 men stepped into the café, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing full Marine Corps dress blues. Their coats were immaculate, buttons polished to a mirror shine. Their eyes, trained and steady, scanned the room with a presence that commanded attention. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The tallest Marine stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. We're looking for the manager. Rick straightened behind the counter. That's me, he said, trying to sound authoritative. The Marine took a slow breath and removed his white cover, holding it under one arm. He looked Rick dead in the eye. You fired a young woman named Emily Harper, he said. Because she fed a man who served this country. Rick's mouth opened, but no words came out. He glanced around the diner, as if hoping someone would back him up. No one spoke. The Marine continued. The man she helped was Sergeant Charles McKinney. He led our unit in Afghanistan. He saved our lives more than once. He's a hero. He was also homeless. And hungry. The other 3 Marines stood behind him, silent, their gazes hard. Rick finally found his voice. I don't know what you've heard, but, look, she broke company policy. We can't give food away. We're a business, not a... A what? One of the other Marines interrupted. Not a place for compassion. A low murmur swept through the café. Rick stammered, she didn't even ask. She just... She shouldn't have needed to ask, the first Marine snapped. She saw a man who was hurting and helped him. That's what we're supposed to do. That's what he taught us. He stepped forward, placing something on the counter. It was a small, worn photo, for young Marines standing beside a smiling, bearded man in fatigues. Charles McKinney. He led us through fire. Carried us out when we were bleeding. And last week, your waitress gave him a bowl of soup when the world had given him nothing. And you fired her for it. Rick looked at the photo, but didn't touch it. The Marine leaned closer, his voice lowering. She gave more in one moment than you've likely given your whole life. A beat of silence passed. Then another Marine turned and spoke to the diners. Where is she now? He asked. Emily. No one answered. The atmosphere hung heavy with guilt, admiration, and something else, a quiet reckoning. Emily stood outside the café, the one she never thought she'd return to, her arms crossed tightly against the spring breeze. She hadn't planned on coming back, not after what happened, not after all the noise online, the press calls, the sudden chaos that had spun out of a single act of decency. But when Carly called her that morning, saying simply, you should come down here. Now, something in her gut told her it was time to face whatever came next. Across the street, reporters with cameras loitered on the sidewalks, their lenses angled toward the diner's familiar sign. A few locals clustered near the parking lot, talking in hushed tones, some pointing, others shaking their heads. Her heart thudded against her ribs as she stepped closer. She hadn't done anything extraordinary. She had fed a hungry man. That was all. Yet somehow, it had become a national moment. The bell above the diner door jingled as she pushed it open. Inside, it was quiet. Not empty, but quiet in a way that carried meaning. Conversations had stilled. Coffee cups sat untouched. Every eye turned to her. At the counter stood the same 4 Marines who had stormed in just days before. And beside them, her breath caught, was the old man from the booth. Charles McKinney. He looked cleaner now, freshly shaven, his hair trimmed, his jacket replaced by a simple blue button-up. He held a cane in one hand, and in the other, a folded paper. When he saw her, his weathered face broke into a soft smile. Emily froze, unsure of what to say. But McKinney stepped forward and spoke first. You gave me more than a sandwich, he said, his voice still carrying the gravel of hard years. You gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. That I mattered. She blinked quickly, fighting tears. One of the Marines turned toward her. Emily, we want to offer you something. We've started a non-profit, a café, actually. One that helps veterans get back on their feet. Meals, job training, community. A place where they're seen. And we need someone to run it. Emily stared at him, stunned. Me? He nodded. We've seen what you stand for. That café was just a job. This would be something more. A mission. The other Marine stepped forward, holding out a thick envelope. We've already secured funding. Donations started coming in after your story hit. People want to help. All because of what you did. She reached for the envelope with trembling fingers, glancing down at the paperwork inside. It was all real. A lease. A starting budget. The beginnings of something new. She looked up again and saw McKinney watching her, eyes misty but bright. He touched her shoulder gently. "You saw me when I was invisible. Most people look right through us. But not you." The door opened behind her, and more people trickled in, veterans, families, neighbors she barely knew. Someone brought flowers. Another offered baked goods. The diner, once a place of silence and shame, was now filled with the quiet hum of hope. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows of the new café, pooling on the polished hardwood floors and casting a golden glow across the fresh paint and newly hung photographs on the walls. It was opening day, and though the building was modest, converted from an old firehouse on the corner of Main and Lincoln, it already pulsed with warmth and life. The smell of brewed coffee, fresh biscuits, and sizzling bacon filled the air, blending with the sound of conversation, soft laughter, and the occasional clink of a fork against a plate. At the heart of it all stood Emily, now dressed in a crisp navy apron with the café's name embroidered over her heart, Harper's Table. Her hands were busy pouring coffee, directing volunteers, checking orders, but her heart was somewhere else, beating steadily behind her ribs with something that felt a lot like purpose. This wasn't like Rosie's diner. This wasn't just work. This was hers, built not on profit margins, but on human dignity. She glanced over at the wall behind the counter, where a framed photo of Charles McKinney hung, him smiling, sitting on a bench outside the café, a mug of coffee in one hand and his cane resting beside him. Below the picture was a small plaque. "In honor of Sergeant Charles McKinney. You led with courage. You lived with humility. You reminded us that no one should be forgotten." Charles had passed away quietly just a few weeks earlier, in his sleep. But he had lived to see the blueprints of the café, to taste the food from the test menu, to walk through the front doors under his own power. And on that day, he had told Emily something she would never forget. "This place is more than bricks and chairs, sweetheart. It's proof that the world can still listen when someone speaks with kindness." Near the front window sat a small wooden table, circular, covered in a clean white cloth, with a single empty chair. On the table stood a folded American flag in a glass case, a pair of worn dog tags, and a gently flickering candle. Beside it, a sign read, "Reserved, for those who served, and those who serve with love." People stopped at the table as they entered, some nodding silently, others leaving small tokens, a medal, a photograph, a flower. One little girl left a crayon drawing of her grandfather, in uniform, with the words, "Thank you," in bright red marker. Throughout the morning, people came and went. Veterans in ball caps from wars decades apart, young active-duty service members in uniform, families of the fallen, and townspeople who just wanted a cup of coffee and something to believe in. The walls of the café slowly filled with memories, snapshots, letters, notes from those who had been helped, or simply moved, by what this place represented. Emily caught sight of the 4 Marines who had first stormed into Rosie's diner. They were seated near the back, smiling, quietly watching the space fill with light and purpose. One of them lifted his mug toward her in silent salute, and she returned the gesture with a nod that said everything words couldn't. Near the counter, a young man, nervous, clearly out of place, approached her. He wore a worn hoodie and carried a tattered duffel bag. I heard this place helps vets," he said, eyes downcast. "I just got back, and I don't really know where else to go." Emily smiled gently and walked around the counter, placing a hand on his arm. "You came to the right place," she said. Then she led him to the window seat, to the table just beside the one always left empty.